The stagecoach kicked up a cloud of Arizona dust, and for Grace Fielding, it felt like the dust of a whole new world. She was 23 years old, trading the grimy factories of Pennsylvania for the wide-open promise of the West. She was a mail-order bride, headed for a man she'd never met, a Mr. Harold Fleming. His letters were kind. They spoke of a good life on his ranch, just outside a town called Copper Canyon. Her whole future was tied up in the words on that paper, tucked safely in her bag. The driver called down, "Almost there, ma'am." Grace smoothed her dress, a navy blue cotton that felt fancy back east, but now just felt tired and dusty. Her stomach was a knot of hope and fear. What if he wasn't the man from the letters? What if she wasn't the woman he was expecting? The coach crested a hill, and there it was. Copper Canyon. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings. It wasn't Philadelphia, but it was supposed to be home. The coach stopped. The doors opened. Grace stepped out, her legs stiff from the long ride. She looked around, expecting to see Harold waiting for her. But there was no one. Just a few cowboys leaning against the saloon and townsfolk going about their day. She walked over to the driver. "Excuse me," she said, her voice a little shaky. "I'm here to meet Mr. Harold Fleming." The driver's face went stiff. He looked over at the storekeeper, who had just stepped outside. They shared a look that made Grace's blood run cold. "Fleming's place?" the driver asked slowly. "Out on Salt Creek Road?" "Yes, that's it," Grace said, a flicker of hope in her chest. The storekeeper cleared his throat. "Miss," he said gently, not looking her in the eye, "you should probably go talk to Sheriff Daniels. His office is just down the way." Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Has something happened to Mr. Fleming?" No one answered. They just pointed down the dusty street. With trembling legs, Grace walked toward the small building with a wooden star hanging over the door. Every step felt like walking to a cliff's edge. She knocked. A gruff voice called, "Come in." Inside, a man with a gray mustache looked up from his desk. He stood when she entered. "I'm Grace Fielding," she managed to say. "I've come from Pennsylvania to marry Mr. Harold Fleming." The sheriff's face fell. He took off his hat and held it in his hands. "Miss Fielding," he said, and his voice was full of pity. "I'm terribly sorry to have to tell you this." He paused, and in that silence, Grace's whole world shattered. "Harold Fleming passed away 6 weeks ago." The room started to spin. Dead. But she had a letter from him, dated just 3 months ago. "Pneumonia," the sheriff said kindly. "It took him fast." She gripped the back of a chair to keep from falling. All that way, all her savings spent on the journey. All her hopes pinned on a man who was already in his grave. She was alone, thousands of miles from anything she knew, with barely $1 to her name. What do I do now?" she whispered. The sheriff looked at her, his eyes full of concern. "His ranch is still there," he said slowly. "The bank hasn't taken it yet, and his neighbor, a fella named Blake Townsend, has been looking after the livestock." Grace looked up, a wild desperation in her eyes. A ranch, a dead man's ranch. Was that her only hope? An hour later, she was standing in a dusty cemetery, staring at a simple wooden cross. Harold Fleming, 1842, 1878. A good man. The words were carved right into the wood. The dirt on the grave was still fresh. She felt nothing. How could she mourn a man she'd never met? Her grief was for the future that had been stolen from her. She was stranded, with no way back and no way forward. That's when a voice behind her made her jump. "Mrs. Fleming." A man was standing there, his hat in his hands. He was tall, with a sun-weathered face and kind eyes. His clothes were dusty, but you could tell he took care of them. "It's Miss Fielding," she corrected him softly. "I never got the chance." He nodded, his expression full of sympathy. "Blake Townsend. I own the ranch next to Harold's. The sheriff told me you'd arrived. I'm mighty sorry for your situation." He talked about Harold, how he'd been excited for her to arrive. Each word was another twist of the knife. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I have no family left back east, no money to return." Blake was quiet for a long moment, just looking at the grave. Then he turned to her. "Harold's place is sitting empty," he said. "The house is sound. The cattle need tending. You could stay." Grace stared at him. Stay? Alone? On a ranch she knew nothing about? "I wouldn't know the first thing about ranching," she said. "You wouldn't be alone," Blake replied, his gaze steady. "I'd help you, teach you what you need to know. Neighbors have to look out for each other out here." "Why? Why would a complete stranger offer her so much?" "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Because Harold was a good man, and he chose you. That means something. And," he added, his voice a little softer, "I know what it's like to be new somewhere with nowhere to turn." He offered to take her to see the ranch the next day. She looked from his honest face to the lonely wooden cross. What other choice did she have? It was either trust this stranger or face complete ruin. "I'd like that," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Townsend." The next morning, Blake arrived not on a horse, but in a wagon. "Thought you might want to bring your trunk," he said with a small smile. "Just in case." The ride out to the ranch was quiet. Blake pointed out landmarks, his voice calm and steady. He showed her his own ranch first, a sprawling, well-kept place that spoke of hard work and success. Then they crested a ridge. "And this," he said, "is Harold's place. Your place, if you want it." It was smaller than Blake's, but it was beautiful. A simple wooden house with a wide porch, a solid-looking barn, and a garden bursting with weeds and vegetables. It had a feeling of home, even though it was empty. Blake helped her down from the wagon, his hand warm and strong in hers. He showed her inside. The house was clean, simple, and filled with handmade furniture. A bookshelf held worn copies of classic books. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, as if waiting for someone. "Harold made most of this himself," Blake said. "He was good with his hands." Grace ran her hand over a smooth pine table. She could almost picture a life here. But it was a life with a ghost. They walked the property. Blake explained everything: the well, the creek, the 50 head of cattle that came with the land. He owned it all free and clear, Blake told her. "No debts that I know of." The words hung in the air. A whole life handed to her. It was an incredible offer, but it felt too easy. "And what do you get out of this, Mr. Townsend?" she asked, turning to face him. He didn't flinch. "A neighbor, Miss Fielding, someone I can count on. Out here, that's worth more than gold." His gaze was direct, unwavering. He told her she didn't have to decide right away. She could stay the night, get a feel for the place. He'd even arrange for a woman from town, a Mrs. Rodriguez, to stay with her for propriety's sake. The thought of the lonely hotel room was unappealing. "I'd like to stay," she said. As Blake rode off to fetch Mrs. Rodriguez and supplies, Grace stood on the porch of the house that might be hers. It wasn't the future she'd planned. But for the first time since arriving in Copper Canyon, it felt like a future might be possible after all. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived like a whirlwind, a cheerful, plump woman who immediately took over the kitchen and started turning the overgrown garden's bounty into a savory stew. Blake returned with supplies, and a small bundle of papers tied with string. "Harold's documents," he said, handing them to her. "The deed, cattle records. You should have these." His thoughtfulness was disarming. "Please," he said, "call me Blake." Before he left, there was a moment between them, a silent understanding that passed in the quiet of the evening. After he was gone, Grace explored her potential new home. In the main bedroom, on a simple wooden dresser, she found a photograph of Harold. He was older than she'd imagined, with a serious face but kind eyes. And next to the photo was a box. Inside, she found all of her letters, tied neatly with a ribbon. He had saved every single one. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding the words she had written, words full of hope for a life with this man, a life that would never happen. But as she lay in Harold's bed that night, listening to the lonely cry of coyotes, a new kind of determination began to form. This wasn't just Harold's legacy. It was a chance. Her chance. When Blake arrived the next day, she was waiting on the porch. He knew her answer before she even said a word. "You're staying," he stated, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Yes," she said, a new strength in her voice. "I'm staying." And just like that, her new life began. Blake started teaching her everything, starting with the most basic skill of all, how to ride a horse. She was clumsy at first, but a gentle mare named Penny was a patient teacher. They hired 2 ranch hands, Juan and Caleb, good men who lived in the bunkhouse and provided some much-needed help and security. The days were long and hard. Her body ached in ways she never knew possible. But every evening, when she looked at what she had accomplished, she felt a satisfaction that factory work had never given her. She was learning, growing stronger, and Blake was always there, a steady presence by her side. He was a patient teacher, never making her feel foolish, always encouraging her. An easy friendship grew between them, but Grace felt something more stirring beneath the surface. 2 weeks in, Grace was finally confident enough to ride out alone to check the fence line by the creek. The sun was hot on her back as she knelt to examine a loose post. She was so focused on her work, she didn't hear the horse approaching until it was almost upon her. It was Blake. He dismounted, his smile easy and warm. "You've got a good eye," he said, inspecting the post. They worked together to fix it, their hands occasionally brushing, sending a jolt through Grace. Afterwards, they rested in the shade of a juniper tree, sharing water from his canteen. The conversation turned personal. She asked him why a man like him wasn't married. He admitted he was waiting for the right kind of woman, one who loved the land as much as he did. His eyes met hers for a moment, and the air crackled with unspoken words. Then he asked her why she'd become a mail-order bride. She told him about her life in the factory, the hopelessness of it. Harold's letters, she said, spoke of open spaces, of a better life. He looked at her, his expression serious. "And now, do you think you made the right choice?" "I don't know yet," she answered honestly. "Ask me again in 2 weeks." That was the deadline they had set, the cattle drive. After that, she would have enough money to leave if she wanted to. As they rode back toward the house, Juan, one of the ranch hands, came riding out to meet them. His face was grim. "Riders coming," he said. "3 of them. Don't look like they're from around here." Blake's whole demeanor changed. He became watchful, tense. "Stay here," he told Grace, and rode forward to meet the strangers. She watched from a distance as they spoke, her heart pounding. Something was wrong. Blake rode back, his face a thundercloud. "They're from the bank in Tucson," he said, his voice tight. "They say Harold took out a mortgage 3 months ago. A big one, and they've come to foreclose." A mortgage? Grace was stunned. "But you said he owned the ranch free and clear." "That's what I thought, Blake said, ushering her inside. "We need to look at those papers I gave you. Now." They spread Harold's documents across the kitchen table. And there it was, tucked away, a mortgage agreement with the First Bank of Tucson. Harold had borrowed $500, an astronomical sum. The first payment was due right after he died. It was never made. A knock echoed through the small house. The bankers were at the door. The man in charge, a thin man with a neat beard named Everett Wilson, didn't waste any time. He explained the situation coldly. The loan was in default. The bank was seizing the property. Grace felt the floor drop out from under her. She'd just started to believe this place could be home, and now it was being ripped away. "How much is the payment?" she asked, her voice trembling. Wilson consulted his notes. "The overdue amount, plus penalties, comes to $125. Due today." $125. She might as well have tried to reach for the moon. "That's unreasonable," Blake argued, his voice low and angry. "You know there's been a death. Give her an extension." But Wilson was unmoved. "The bank's policies are clear," he said. "Pay today, or we begin foreclosure proceedings." Blake pulled Grace into the kitchen. "This is wrong," he whispered fiercely. "Something isn't right." "What can I do?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't have that kind of money." Blake looked at her, his jaw set. "I do," he said. "I'll lend it to you." Grace couldn't believe it. "I couldn't ask that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," he said firmly. "You can pay me back after the cattle drive. I trust you, Grace." He looked deep into her eyes. "I believe you belong here, and I've come to care what happens to you." His words sent a shockwave through her, a warmth that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with him. They walked back into the main room. "We'll make the payment," Blake announced. Wilson looked annoyed, but he couldn't refuse. An hour later, Blake returned with the money. The bankers counted it, wrote a receipt, and left. The immediate threat was gone, but a new one had taken its place. Grace now owed Blake Townsend a fortune. She had traded one impossible situation for another. After the bankers were gone, the silence in the small house was deafening. Grace sat at the table staring at the receipt. She was safe for now. But she was in Blake's debt. "I still don't understand," she said, breaking the silence. "Why would Harold borrow so much money? There's nothing new here. No improvements." Blake hesitated. "Maybe it wasn't for the ranch," he suggested. "Maybe it was for you." Grace looked at him, confused. "He might have used it to pay for your travel," Blake explained gently. "Or maybe for a dowry." But that didn't make sense. Her passage wasn't that expensive, and they had agreed she would pay her own way. The mystery of the $500 was a heavy weight in the room. Grace insisted on writing Blake a promissory note for the loan. He took it reluctantly. "I don't want to be in debt to anyone," she told him. "Especially not you." As he rode off into the sunset, Grace felt more alone than ever. The ranch wasn't truly hers. It belonged to the bank, and now, in a way, it belonged to Blake. And the man she was supposed to marry, the man she thought she knew from his letters, was a complete stranger, a man with secrets. The next day, they rode into town, determined to find answers. They checked with the stagecoach company, the telegraph office, the local sheriff. No one knew anything about Harold spending a large sum of money. He hadn't paid for her ticket. He hadn't sent any money back east. It was at the general store that they got their first clue. The owner, Mr. Peterson, remembered something. "Harold did order something special from my catalog a few months back," he said, stroking his beard. "Paid extra to have it delivered quick." He pulled out his ledger. "Here it is. One lady's saddle, finest quality. He pointed to the price. $50. Grace was speechless. $50 for a saddle. It's in the barn, Blake remembered. I saw it. Hand-tooled leather, silver accents. It's beautiful. A $50 saddle. A lavish gift for a woman he'd never met. But that still left $450 unaccounted for. It was a dead end. The money had simply vanished. That afternoon, they tore the house apart, searching for any clue, any hidden paper that might explain where the money went. They found nothing. Maybe it doesn't matter, Blake said, trying to reassure her as they sat, exhausted, at the kitchen table. The mortgage is current. You can make the next payment after the cattle drive. It matters to me, Grace insisted. I need to know who he was. Was he a man in trouble? A liar? Blake reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was warm, steadying. From everything I knew, Harold was an honest man, he said softly. There has to be another explanation. Just as he spoke, his eyes locked with hers, a knock came at the door. It was Juan. Cattle had broken through a fence on the west side of the property. The moment was broken. The mystery would have to wait. The next week was a frenzy of preparation for the cattle drive. It was Grace's last chance to prove herself, and her only chance to earn the money to pay Blake back and secure her future. She worked harder than she ever had in her life, riding from sunup to sundown. Every muscle screamed, but with every passing day, she felt more at home, more capable. And Blake was always there. Their friendship deepened, the unspoken feelings between them growing stronger with every shared glance, every quiet moment. Even Mrs. Rodriguez noticed. "Senor Blake," she said one evening, a knowing smile on her face. "He looks at you differently now, like a man looks at the woman he admires." Grace tried to deny it, but her heart knew it was true. The night before the cattle drive, Blake came to the house late. The air was tense with anticipation. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly. "About staying?" "I'm still not sure," she admitted. "This loan, this mystery, it hangs over everything." "About that," Blake said, reaching into his pocket. "I think I might have found something." He pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It was delivered to my ranch by mistake. It's addressed to Harold." Her hands trembled as she took it. She tore away the paper. Inside was a small velvet box. She opened it. Nestled on the dark velvet was a ring, a diamond engagement ring. It wasn't huge, but it was beautiful, and it sparkled in the lamplight. A small note had fallen out. She picked it up and read it aloud. "Mr. Fleming, as requested, we've completed the custom ring. The balance of $450 has been paid in full. Thank you for your business. Henderson and Sons Jewelers, Tucson. $450. The rest of the money." It all clicked into place. The saddle, the ring. Harold hadn't been in trouble. He wasn't a liar. He was a romantic. He'd gone into debt to shower her with gifts, to give her a welcome she would never forget. Tears streamed down Grace's face. He had done all this for her, and he had died before she could even thank him. "Does this change your decision?" Blake asked, his voice soft. The mystery was solved, but her future was still her own to decide. "I need to see this cattle drive through," she said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "Then I'll know for certain." The cattle drive was 3 days of dust, sweat, and unrelenting hard work. 200 head of cattle, a combined herd from both ranches, churning up the dry earth as they moved toward the railhead. Grace rode flank, her body aching, her throat raw. But she felt alive. She was a part of something real, something she was building with her own 2 hands. That first night they made camp by a creek. After a dinner of beans and bacon, Grace sat by the fire, watching the stars blanket the sky. Blake came and sat beside her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You did well today," he said, his voice a low rumble. Better than I expected. They sat in a comfortable silence, the fire crackling between them. I've been thinking about Harold, Grace said finally. The ring, the saddle, they were beautiful gifts, but they weren't what I needed. She turned to look at him, the firelight dancing in her eyes. I needed a partner, someone to share the work, the struggle, the joy. That's what I really came here for. Blake's gaze was intense. And is that what you want now? He asked. A partner? She nodded slowly. I think it is. I've learned I can do this. I'm strong enough, but I don't want to do it alone. She took a deep breath, ready to say his name, ready to tell him what was in her heart. But a shout from one of the hands cut through the night. Riders coming! Instantly, Blake was on his feet, his hand on his gun. Stay here, he ordered, but Grace was right behind him. 3 figures emerged from the darkness, riding slowly toward the camp. That's far enough, Blake called out. State your business. One of the riders called back, and a chill went down Grace's spine. Blake Townsend, it's Everett Wilson, from the First Bank of Tucson. Wilson, the banker. What in God's name was he doing out here, in the middle of nowhere? He dismounted, his 2 associates behind him. He was holding a leather portfolio. I apologize for the interruption, Wilson said, his voice slick and insincere. But a matter has come to light that couldn't wait. What matter? Blake demanded. Wilson pulled a document from his portfolio. It concerns the mortgage on the Fleming ranch, he said. Our auditors discovered an irregularity. What kind of irregularity? Grace asked, stepping forward. Wilson cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Due to a clerical error, he explained, the mortgage was never properly filed with the county. Legally speaking, it doesn't exist. Grace and Blake stared at him, then at each other. Didn't exist? What did that mean? It means, Wilson said, his eyes darting around, that the bank has no legal claim on the property. He handed a letter to Grace. It was a formal release, relinquishing any and all claims on the Fleming ranch. The world tilted on its axis for the second time since she'd arrived in Arizona. The ranch, the land, the house. It was hers, free and clear, all of it. But the loan, Grace stammered. Harold still borrowed the money. Yes, and the bank expects to be repaid, Wilson said quickly. But we cannot foreclose. It was our error. Blake stepped closer, his eyes narrowed into slits. Then why did you come to the house threatening to take her land? You knew you had no legal right. Wilson paled. As I said, an error. We regret any distress. And why ride all the way out here now? Blake pressed. This news could have waited. The banker had no good answer. He mumbled something about setting the record straight. Then he and his men practically ran to their horses and disappeared into the night. Grace stood by the fire, holding the piece of paper that changed everything. The ranch was hers. The debt to the bank was just a personal loan now, one they had no power to collect on. They couldn't take her home. Blake's voice cut through her thoughts. He was bluffing, he said, his voice cold with fury. Wilson, he knew the mortgage was invalid. He saw Harold die, saw a lone woman from the east show up, and he thought he could scare you into running. He wanted to steal your land. The sheer wickedness of it took her breath away. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime. He had preyed on her vulnerability, on her grief and fear. But he had underestimated her, and he had underestimated the man standing beside her. She looked up at Blake, at the protective anger in his eyes. This changes things, she said softly. The fear that had been a constant companion was finally gone. She was no longer just surviving. She could build a life. I'm staying, she said, And this time there was no doubt in her voice. "I want to make this ranch thrive." She looked at Blake, her heart open and certain. "And I want to see what might grow between us, if you want that too." A slow smile spread across Blake's face, chasing away the anger. "Grace Fielding," he said, his voice full of warmth. "I've been interested since the day you stood your ground and decided to try." He took her hand. "You came here expecting to be a wife. Instead, you became a rancher. You built a new life from the ashes of the old one. How could I not come to love you?" And then, in the flickering firelight, under a canopy of a million stars, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of pity or friendship. It was a kiss of promise, of a future she had never dared to dream of. The rest of the drive was a blur of happiness. They sold the cattle at the railhead for a good price, more than enough to pay Blake back for his loan and make the first payment to the bank in Tucson on her own terms. The journey back to Copper Canyon was different. They rode side by side, no longer just neighbors, but partners, planning the future of their ranches, of their lives. They arrived back at her ranch on a perfect autumn afternoon. As she dismounted, Grace looked at the small house, the sturdy barn, the land stretching out before her. "Home," she said, the word tasting sweet on her tongue. Blake came to stand beside her. "Grace," he said, taking her hand, "I know we agreed to take our time, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. When you're ready, I want to ask you a very important question." She turned to face him, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I think," she said, her voice soft but sure, "I'm ready now." He kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that sealed their future. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of courtship. Blake would visit in the evenings, bringing wildflowers or a book of poetry. They rode their lands together, their love growing as strong and steady as the mountains that watched over them. The whole town saw it, and they approved. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in fiery colors, Blake sat beside her on the porch. He took her hand, his expression serious. "I love you, Grace Fielding," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love your strength, your courage, and the way you made this place your own." He pulled a small box from his pocket. It wasn't the fancy diamond Harold had ordered. It was a simple gold band with a small, perfect sapphire, the color of the twilight sky. "Will you marry me, Grace? Will you join your life and your ranch with mine?" Tears of joy streamed down her face as she looked from the ring to the face of the man she loved. She had come to Arizona looking for a husband, a provider. She had found something so much better. She had found a partner. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Blake Townsend, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later, in the small church in Copper Canyon, surrounded by the entire town. Grace wore a new dress, the color of the sapphire in her ring. Blake looked at her as if she were the only person in the world. At the celebration at Blake's ranch, under a sky full of stars, Grace slipped away to the porch for a quiet moment. Blake found her there. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "None. My journey here was strange, and it started with heartbreak. But every twist, every turn, it all led me right here. To you." He wrapped his arm around her. "Mrs. Townsend," he said, testing the name. She smiled up at him. I liked the sound of that. Her story wasn't what she had planned. It was better. It was a story of a woman who faced the worst and refused to break. A woman who found her own strength in the wild heart of the West and in the love of a good, honest man. It turned out she didn't need someone to give her a future. She was strong enough to build one herself. What do you think? Was Grace's journey a matter of fate or a testament to her own strength? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more tales of unbelievable twists and incredible justice.